The year is 316 BCE, and Antigonos Monophthalmos was one of the most powerful men in Eurasia. As the victor of the Second War of the Diadochi, he now controls the 1,000 nations from Bithynia to Bactria. In Greece and Thrace, his former friends Cassander and Lysimachos have grown fearful of their comrade's ascension and have entered into furtive talks with Ptolemy in Egypt. They know Antigonos is too powerful, and they cannot allow this to stand. The land of the Fertile Crescent will now become the theatre of the deadliest Greek play, the Third War of the Diadochi. The two basileis and the new pharaoh will face the pretender king of Asia, and by the pharaoh's side, Seleukos will become admiral of the Mediterranean, and so much more. This is a war that will show both glory and folly, and from which the most unexpected rulers will rise. Welcome to our 4th episode of the series on the Wars of the Diadochi, where we will talk about the Third War of the Successors. The Third War of the Diadochi began because of the competing political agendas of the surviving successors. Ptolemy's goal in the war was to maintain his independence in Egypt, a realistic ambition due to Egypt's well-defined eastern borders and strong bureaucratic state and identity. Antigonos, on the other hand, wanted to assume control of all the Diadochi territories, keeping Alexander's empire united, with himself at the helm. His own ambitions seem evident at this point, for he executed Python in 314 BCE when he assumed he was becoming too powerful and annexed his satrapy of Media to his own empire. It is apparent that Antigonos had some plans for unifying the empire under his rule, as opposed to Ptolemy's own plans for keeping his own fiefdom. Thus, Antigonos and Ptolemy were almost destined to become enemies. Cassander, meanwhile, had decided to marry Alexander's sister, Thessaloniki, shortly after his murder of Alexander's mother, Olympias. Through his political marriage, Cassander aimed to become Alexander in place of Alexander. Lysimachos' interests were similar to Ptolemy's, in that he wanted to ensure the independence of his territories, which bordered Antigonos. Seleukos' motives are less clear, likely jumping into the simmering pot of internecine conflict in order to regain his power and influence. Thus, when Seleukos arrived in Egypt and talked to Ptolemy, the two corresponded with the other two Diadochi in their camp, then sent an ultimatum to Antigonos, demanding that he redistribute the wealth of the empire in Babylon's treasuries and disband his army. These demands, if fulfilled, would essentially result in a new partition of Alexander's empire. Lysimachos demanded Hellespontine Phrygia, Cassander wished for Cappadocia and Lycia, Seleukos ordered the return of Babylon, and Ptolemy asked for Syria. The Diadochi made these demands on the basis that they had been allies against Eumenes and thus deserved a fairer deal. Naturally, the old general refused, declaring war through messengers, and the war began in 315 BCE. While it was Antigonos' enemies who took the political initiative, it was Antigonos who made the first strike of the war by attacking the Near Eastern provinces under Ptolemy's control. This flew in violation of the Triparadisos Agreement, which was important for launching any assaults into Asia Minor or Persia. Thus, the Third War began just like the previous ones, with court intrigue across the continents. Antigonos besieged Tyre like Alexander once did, but Ptolemy's navy kept sending aid to the city. As Egypt and Greece's endless navies commanded the seas, Antigonos summoned all the viceroys of Phoenicia and Syria, commanding them to establish 3 shipyards in Byblos, Sidon and Tripoli to build him a navy of his own to match. He also sent envoys to the island of Cyprus and managed to gain most of its city kingdoms to his side. However, the island must have been politically divided, as Seleukos, now admiral for Ptolemy, sailed past him and used Cyprus as a springboard to raid the southern coast of Antigonos' territories in Asia Minor. Moreover, Ptolemy, Cassander and Lysimachos sponsored a revolt against Antigonos led by Asander, Antigonos' subordinate who commanded Ionia and parts of Asia Minor. To cover this new front, Antigonos chose to send his nephew, ironically named Ptolemy, to deal with Asander. Antigonos also issued promises of freedom to the Greek polis in an attempt to turn them against his opponents. Not to be outdone, Ptolemy also announced a guarantee to the Greek city-states in order to counter Antigonos. Unable to take Tyre without sufficient naval support, Antigonos diverted his campaign to take Gaza and the Levant from Ptolemy before returning to Tyre for a second go at the city. Eventually Tyre fell to Antigonos. Unfortunately, historical records are scant when it comes to explaining how. After his conquest of Tyre, Antigonos' victories began to compound when the Antigonid Ptolemy sent news of major victories in Asia Minor, which forced Cassander to turtle up in his satrapy of Caria. Cassander was having a hard time and wanted to negotiate, as the Freedom Declaration spurred the Peloponnese into revolt alongside Polyperchon. Ptolemy was not standing idly by and sent further naval support. Still, the industrious Phoenicians had built a large armada already, and soon Antigonos' ships had achieved naval supremacy in the Aegean under the navarch Dioscurides. The one-eyed Titan decided to finish his affairs on the northern front, and with his horizon-spanning armies, marched through the Taurus Mountains to Asia Minor and then to Europe, where Lysimachos awaited him. Left to defend the new territories in the Levant was a young man named Demetrios, son of Antigonos and Stratonike. By his side were Python of Agenor and Nearchos, the admiral of Alexander. This was help he would certainly need, as in the southern deserts of the Sinai, Ptolemy and Seleukos were increasingly militant, hoping to break through the sands and burn the enemy. Demetrios positioned himself in Coele Syria, awaiting an attack from the southern front. Still, Ptolemy took him by surprise when he took some of his ships, broke through the eastern Mediterranean, and then raided the southern front of Asia Minor with his troops. The young Prince of Asia was flabbergasted and turned his troops north to face the Hellenic pharaoh, but Ptolemy returned to the Nile before he could be confronted. There, he and Seleukos discussed their next steps, with the latter convincing the former to use Demetrios' absence in Cilicia to reconquer Coele Syria. To that end, Ptolemy gathered his Egyptian and Macedonian troops and marched into the Sinai Peninsula towards Gaza. Demetrios was advised against fighting the two generals due to their skills in the art of war, but he was determined to protect his father's newfound provinces. Thus he marched through Syria and Judea to meet them in Gaza. The battle took place in a field between the Besor River and Gaza proper. Ptolemy and Seleukos commanded a sizable force, comprised of 18,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. On the other side of the field, Demetrios had 12,500 infantry, 4,400 cavalry, and 43 war elephants. The order of battle was as follows. The Antigonid left had 3,000 cavalry on its left flank, commanded by Demetrios and his advisors. 800 elite Macedonians and 100 elite light Tarentines, known for their javelins, supplemented the left flanks as well. In front of them stood 30 behemoth Indian elephants, with 1,500 light infantry wielding bows in between them. An 11,000-strong phalanx, comprised of 2,000 Macedonians and 9,000 mercenaries, appeared in the center block. The rest of the elephants, 13 in total, were in the front. The remaining 1,500 cavalry were on the right flank. Ptolemy and Seleukos had initial plans also to put their strong cavalry on their left flank, but they saw the enemy deployments and reversed course, placing 3,000 cavalry on their right flank. Ptolemy prepared for the brunt of the elephant charge by placing his engineers in front, who layered the field with metal spikes. Next to the spikes were javelin throwers. The center was filled with 18,000 infantrymen. The rest of the cavalry was placed on the left flank, numbering about 1,000 people. The battle began with Demetrios dashing forward at the head of his cavalry in a lightning bolt charge. Seleukos and Ptolemy met the charge head-on with their own mounted units, but in the ensuing clash, their cavalry was beaten back. However, Demetrios' charge had left his right wing wide open, allowing Seleukos and Ptolemy to maneuver the right flank of their elites around the inexperienced Demetrios. The spears clashed for a long while, with many noble and heroic men falling, but the melee ultimately ended inconclusively. Demetrios decided to order his elephants to charge and destroy the enemy. The Titans of antiquity marched forward, but their forward momentum was halted by the opponent's light cavalry, who rained endless javelins and arrows on the elephants. Trying to weather this storm, the elephant handlers fought through this hail of flak, but found themselves against the metal spikes. In a tragic end, the elephants were almost all killed or captured, and their handlers were all killed off. When the Antigonid army saw this carnage, morale plummeted and a rout ensued, with many fleeing back towards Gaza. Demetrios shouted and raged in an attempt to rally the army, but it was not meant to be. Thus he ordered a retreat, but his infantry was in chaos, making an orderly withdrawal impossible. Thus, Ptolemy and Seleukos surrounded the manic remnants of Demetrios' army and trapped them, capturing over 8,000 of them and killing the rest. Demetrios had lost his honor, but escaped the field with his life, managing to return to Phoenicia. Although Demetrios had been humiliated, Antigonos was achieving victories in his theatre. He had defeated Asander and sent his nephews to fight Cassander in Greece. Moreover, despite his humiliation, Demetrios did manage to win a significant victory in Myus in 312 BCE against an advancing general of Ptolemy called Chiles. Antigonos returned to Couille, Syria with 80,000 men, and quickly took back the Phoenician coasts. Meanwhile, Ptolemy had given Seleukos 200 cavalry and 800 infantry and allowed him to move forth to recapture Babylon, the city he had been exiled from. Ptolemy himself marched back into Egypt in retreat. Meanwhile, while campaigning in Edom, Antigonos found out about another actor in the region, the wealthy Arabian kingdom of the Nabateans. The Nabateans controlled spices and the frankincense trade by taxing caravans passing through them to the port of Gaza, so Antigonos wished to secure control over them. This was the beginning of 3 Antigonid-Nabatean confrontations, all of which ended up being comically tragic failures for Antigonos and Demetrios. While they gained some valuable resources, they were ultimately forced to leave the stubbornly defiant Nabateans alone. Antigonos would have attacked the Nabateans further, but found himself having to relocate his military resources, for the conflict with his Diadochi rivals was soon to become a 3-front war, as Seleukos advanced upon Babylon. Seleukos and his 1,000 troops were marching east through Syria when they were joined by 1,000 more soldiers from Carrhae, the city of astrologers. He arrived in Babylon in May to find the city gates open to him, likely due to the good relations he had cultivated with the city's elites. The general must have been gleeful at this reception, but his mood soured when he turned to the citadel and saw that Antigonid loyalists were barricaded inside. Thus, he and his troops blocked the citadel and initiated a siege. Seleukos cut off water in the city and then constructed a dam on the Euphrates River, which ran through the citadel. The Antigonid loyalists continued to resist, and thus Seleukos ordered the dam destroyed. A massive tidal wave crashed into the walls, smashing them apart. The citizens of Babylon must have been shocked at the titanic move, and after some small pockets of resistance were snuffed out, the Antigonids surrendered. Seleukos was finally ruler of Babylon, and by extension, the heart of the Persian Empire. Knowing things were about to get tough in the east, Antigonos began negotiations with Cassander and Lysimachos. At the same time, his satraps, Nicanor of Media and Euagoras of Aria, mustered 17,000 troops and moved to meet him. Flush from his victory in Babylon, Seleukos mustered 3,000 infantry and 400 cavalry. They moved into the marshes of the Tigris to intercept these 2 satraps before they could link up with Antigonos. When Nicanor and Euagoras arrived on the banks of the Tigris, they were unaware that Seleukos was still around. He thus ordered his men to camp for the night. Seleukos waited until nightfall, then pounced like a tiger upon Nicanor's poorly guarded stockade, engaging in a mass slaughter. Euagoras was killed in the commotion, causing the Persians under his command to change allegiances. Nicanor fled with a few remaining allies, leaving Seleukos to take over Media and Elam. While the havoc in the Orient was occurring, Antigonos was busy with negotiations. Ptolemy was brought into the discussions with the other Diadochi, resulting in the conclusion of a treaty known as the Peace of the Dynasts. Per its terms, Cassander received Macedon and Thessaly, and was permitted to put garrisons in Greek cities, which were now seen as independent by all kings. Lysimachos continued to own Thrace, while Ptolemy consolidated control over Cyprus and Egypt. Antigonos was left with the rest, but his core of control was centered around Phoenicia, Asia Minor and Syria. It was also agreed that Alexander IV, son of Roshanak and Alexander III, would take over once he came of age. However, seeing the son of the great conqueror as a threat to his rule, Cassander decided to act, ordering him discreetly slain and his body hidden. Thus passed the son of Alexander, grandson of Philip, and the last king of the Argead dynasty which had ruled Macedonia for centuries. Roshanak perished as well in a foreign land. This tragic and unceremonious end is a testament to the brutality of Hellenistic politics. Cassander did not announce the deaths of Roshanak and Alexander IV publicly, fearing retribution, and thus continued to claim to rule as regent on behalf of Alexander's bloodline, rather than as a usurper king who had snuffed it out. One man was excluded from the Peace of the Dynasts, Seleukos, who now had taken the title Nicator, or the Victorious. He had now taken Arya and Persia, with only really Sogdiana and Bactria being free of his control. The Third War of the Diadochi was finally over, but the balance of power between the former generals of Alexander remained incredibly tense. Antigonos was determined to conquer the east once more, while Seleukos was spreading rumors that Alexander had appeared to him in a dream and had proclaimed him to be king. The sabers were rattled, and Antigonos began preparations to retake Babylon. War was coming once more, and the ancient Fertile Crescent would be its battleground. In our next video on the Wars of the Diadochi, we will cover the Babylonian War. To ensure you don't miss it, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.